The plane landed softly in Omaha, as if even the wind respected the quiet return of an old resident. But he didn't arrive as Warren Buffett, the oracle of Omaha. No cameras, no security, no entourage. Just an elderly man in a worn-out cap and an oversized coat, his steps slow but steady. He carried a small backpack, light in weight but heavy with memory. In the back seat of a rented sedan, he watched the familiar streets pass by like pages from an old photo album. The store names had changed, but the smells hadn't. He remembered the bakery on 49th and Underwood, now replaced by a sterile laundromat. The red-haired boy who used to sell newspapers on the corner, his fingers always stained with ink. The morning walks to school, counting the coins in his pocket like sacred treasures. This neighborhood had shaped his earliest values, and now, after so many years, he wanted to see it again with his own eyes. No filters, no fame, no nostalgia, just a man returning to the beginning. It was March. The chills still traced the sidewalks with long shadows, and the city felt like it was holding its breath. Warren, or Walter, as he'd quietly chosen to call himself for this visit, had no grand reason. Just a feeling, a pull, something he couldn't name. The car stopped a few yards from the house where he had grown up. Or rather, the place where he had learned how to grow. The house still stood, the same wooden fence now soft with moss and wear. The windows had changed, but he recognized the creak of the gate, the muffled echo of steps on the porch. He didn't knock. He just stood there, breathing. Time folded around him like a quiet wave. He wasn't here for praise. He wasn't here for legacy. He was here to remember something he feared he had forgotten. He walked, step by step, through streets that now looked both smaller and heavier. The houses were quieter, the gardens unkempt. A group of teenagers lounged on the concrete stoop of a nearby home, staring into their phones, unaware of the world or the man around them. A dog barked in the distance. An old woman watered her plants with a leaky hose. No one recognized him, and that comforted him. As he walked, Warren felt something uncoil inside. Not the weight of age, but the shedding of identity. He was no longer a billionaire, no longer an icon, just a man coming home. At the corner of Grant Street, he stepped into a small coffee shop that had somehow survived since the 1970s. The sign above was faded, but the smell of strong coffee clung to the air like memory. He took a seat in the corner, ordered a black coffee, and observed. In the back, a young woman read a book with a torn cover. A man at the counter spoke softly to himself, likely repeating stories no one else wanted to hear, and the waiter, a skinny kid with sharp eyes and a calm presence, served each person with more kindness than the uniform required. Warren smiled. There was something here, something he couldn't name yet, but it had begun to stir quietly inside his chest. On the second day, Warren walked without a plan. He let his feet choose, as if they knew the path better than his thoughts did. He ended up near the school he once attended. The building looked tired now, graffiti clinging to its corners, the windows dull with time, but the structure remained, and so did the memories. He didn't go in. He stood across the street, watching. The bell rang and children burst through the doors, backpacks too large for their small frames. Among them, one boy caught his eye. He moved differently, not faster or slower, just lighter, as if the world hadn't touched him yet. The boy paused at the gate and looked straight at him. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Warren felt something strange in that gaze, not recognition, but familiarity, as if the child somehow sensed the weight the old man carried. Warren turned and continued walking. Around the block, he passed a small barber shop. The front was newer, but the name Leo's Barbershop was the same. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The chime above the door rang like an echo from a different life. The scent of aftershave and polished wood greeted him with surprising tenderness. "Can I help you?" a voice called from the back. Warren froze. That voice, older now, raspier, but unmistakable. "Leo," he said quietly. The man stepped forward. He was heavier, with a shock of white hair and a belly shaped by too many coffees. But it was him. The same Leo who used to cut Warren's hair when he was just a boy, chattering about stocks no one else understood. "That's me. But are you—" Leo squinted, trying to recognize something in the stranger's eyes. "Walter," Warren replied, lowering his gaze. "I used to live around here a long time ago." Leo seemed to accept the answer without further question. Some men come back with different names, he must have thought, but the same eyes. "Have a seat. Chairs open." As the scissors hummed and the razor whispered, the two exchanged few words. Leo spoke of the neighborhood, how much it had changed, who had left, who had stayed, and about a boy once who gave him a silver coin as thanks for a free haircut, because he didn't have the money. "I kept that coin for years," Leo said with a laugh. "I think it was the first investment I ever received." Warren didn't speak. He simply smiled, the irony quietly piercing his heart. As he stood to leave, Leo placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's good to see someone who still looks people in the eye, Walter. You don't get much of that around here anymore." Warren nodded. The sun was starting to lower, and with it an old shadow inside him began to stretch. The town was the same, but the aches were new. That night, in the modest motel room he had quietly checked into, Warren sat by the window with the lights off. Outside, the street lamp cast a soft amber glow over the parking lot. Inside, the silence felt thick. He held an old photograph in his hand, creased at the edges, nearly faded. It showed a boy, maybe 10, standing on a porch with a paper route bag slung over one shoulder and a shy smile on his face. His shoes were scuffed, his shirt a little too big, but his eyes burned with quiet intent. He remembered that boy, not just the image, but the texture of that life. The basement of his childhood home had been his sanctuary. That's where he kept his small chalkboard, his savings jar, and stacks of newspapers he'd collect after delivering them. He would sit for hours, counting pennies and reading financial pages he barely understood, circling numbers and imagining them growing. But the money wasn't the point, not yet. It was about order, about trying to make sense of a world that felt too big, too unpredictable. His father had lost his job once, briefly, during the war. Warren had seen the worry on his mother's face, the way silence stretched between her and the dinner table. He never forgot that tension, so he learned to save, to plan, to control what he could, and he gave quietly, instinctively. A sandwich here. A borrowed coat returned 2 winters later, unmentioned. A boy in his class, Eugene, always showed up with broken shoes. One day, Warren had left a new pair in Eugene's locker. No note, no credit. He just knew the size. Eugene never found out who it was. Years later, Eugene dropped out of school. Warren heard he worked construction, then vanished from town. The name hadn't entered his mind in decades, until this morning. Earlier, while leaving the coffee shop, Warren had noticed a man sitting on the curb beside a broken shopping cart. His beard was graying, and he held a sketchbook full of fading pencil drawings, portraits of people, places, faces that seemed pulled from memory. Warren had stopped, unsure why, and the man had looked up. There it was, the face beneath the years. "Eugene?" The man squinted. "Do I know you?" "No," Warren replied, heart tightening, "but I think I knew who you were once." Eugene smiled. Not the smile of recognition, but of a man who was simply glad someone saw him. "You want a portrait?" he asked, lifting the sketchbook. "Don't got much else to offer." Warren nodded, and so Eugene drew, with rough hands and surprising care. Each line was slow, as if pulled from a different decade. When he turned the sketchpad around, Warren saw a face not quite his own, but close. It looked like a boy who had once believed the world could be bent with kindness. "You've got eyes like someone who remembers," Eugene said softly. Warren opened his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and quietly slipped it into the sketchbook without a word. He didn't cry. Not then. But now, in the motel room, staring at that old photo, he felt the tears gather. Not from sadness, but from a truth too long ignored. Some of the most powerful things he'd ever done had gone, unnoticed, even by himself. And maybe he thought that was the point all along. The next morning, Warren found himself walking east, into the parts of the neighborhood tourists never wandered into. Paint peeled from fences. Empty lots held the skeletons of dreams half-built and long abandoned. But even here, there was movement. A slow, persistent hum of life trying to press on. He followed it. It led him to a small community center, a plain, single-story building with fading blue trim and a hand-painted sign that read, "The Hollow Tree Project." Inside, the air smelled of dust, coffee, and children's crayons. Laughter echoed faintly from a room down the hall. A woman at the front desk looked up, offered a polite smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm just looking," Warren replied softly. The woman nodded. "We have a reading hour in the back, and the food pantry's open until noon." He wandered down the hallway. On the walls hung photos, not of officials or donors, but of kids. Dozens of portraits, all taped up, smiling or silly, each one titled with a first name and a word. Amari, curiosity; Jenna, resilience; Luis, fire. Beneath them, a quote painted in freehand. "No one knows the weight of a single. Kindness until it grows roots." Warren stopped. He stared at the words. Then a voice from behind. "Most people don't notice that quote. You're either the first today or the first in weeks." Warren turned. A man stood in the doorway. Late 30s, maybe 40. Tall, with a quiet confidence. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, ink on his hands. Teacher, Warren guessed, or caretaker, someone who'd stayed when others left. "I'm sorry to wander in," Warren said. "I grew up near here. Just came back to see what's changed." The man stepped closer, extending a hand. "Name's Malik. I run this place." Warren shook it. "It's beautiful," he said. "And needed." Malik nodded. "That's why we stayed. It started small. Just a table, a few books, some fruit from a volunteer's backyard. But one day, a check showed up. No name, no letter, just a donation large enough to keep the lights on for 3 years. Warren's brow lifted slightly. No one knew who sent it. Still don't, but it came with a note, typed, no signature. All it said was, "Plant deeply, water quietly." Malik smiled at the memory. That phrase changed how I saw everything, made me realize maybe we don't need to be seen, just consistent, just present. Warren felt something shift in his chest. He had no memory of sending that donation. But the phrase, he remembered writing it once, long ago, in a letter to himself, after his first large investment paid off, a personal reminder not to be consumed by ego. Somehow, somewhere, those words had traveled. Malik motioned toward the back room. "Want to see something?" Warren nodded. They entered a sunlit space filled with mismatched chairs, shelves of donated books, and a chalkboard covered in doodles. A dozen children sat in a circle around an older woman reading aloud. The air was full of story. Warren watched them, faces lit, questions blooming between paragraphs, and suddenly he saw something he hadn't expected, not numbers, not projections, but continuity. The invisible lines between a sandwich left on a desk, a pair of shoes in a locker, a check mailed with no return address, and these children, this life. It wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about presence, about what survived of us in the spaces we'd long forgotten. And for the first time since arriving, Warren felt a weight lift, not from his shoulders, but from his name. He was still just a man, but now he knew what kind. And that night, Warren couldn't sleep. He sat at the motel desk, an old notepad before him, the paper yellowed, the pen in his hand trembling slightly. Outside, the town was silent. Not asleep, just quiet in the way only places filled with history can be. He began to write. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even a plan. Just fragments, names he remembered, streets that no longer existed, smells, sounds, the shape of the mailbox outside his childhood home, the voice of his mother humming while folding laundry. Then a line came to him, clear, certain. There are gifts we give that outlive us, precisely because no one knows we gave them. He circled the sentence, sat back, and let it breathe. The next morning, Warren walked to a bank, not a massive corporate branch, but a local credit union tucked between a pharmacy and a laundromat. He waited in line behind a woman with 2 children and a man depositing change in slow, careful movements. When it was his turn, he asked to speak with a manager. In a small office, he introduced himself simply as Walter. No mention of Buffett, no hints. I'd like to establish a local education. Trust, he said, with very specific terms. He placed a folder on the desk. Inside were hand-drafted guidelines, scholarships for students from the neighborhood, stipends for after-school teachers, funds for food programs and library repairs, all to be distributed anonymously, year after year without public credit or recognition. The manager flipped through the pages, eyebrows lifting slowly. Sir, this is generous. May I ask what inspired it? Warren smiled softly. A pair of shoes and a library card many years ago. No more was said. He left the building with a quiet sense of certainty, not pride, not relief, just stillness, as if a note, long held, had finally resolved. From there, he walked again, past the old houses, the corner store where he once bought licorice, the cracked sidewalks that remembered his younger footsteps. At the edge of a small park, he paused. A girl, no older than 7, was drawing with chalk on the concrete. Spirals, flowers, stars. She looked up and offered a piece of pink chalk without a word. Warren knelt and took it. He didn't know what to draw until his hand moved on its own. A simple tree, wide trunk, deep roots, a hollow in the center. The girl looked at it, then pointed. That's where the squirrel lives. Warren smiled. Yes, he said, exactly. As he stood to leave, she asked, Are you someone's grandpa? He paused. Not today, but maybe. She nodded like that made perfect sense, and with that, he walked on. The chalk would wash away in the next rain, but the trust would remain. The tree too, both the one he'd drawn and the one he'd become, not for others to admire, but for them to rest beneath. It was his last evening in town. He had booked a return flight under his alias, Walter B., departing quietly at dawn. But the hours before that held a stillness that didn't feel finished. There was something left, something unsaid. So he walked, not toward any specific place, just letting the fading light of the day guide him. The streets were emptying, the air had cooled, the neighborhood settled into itself like a breath being held. Eventually, he found himself back where it began, in front of the house, the one with the sagging porch and the wooden fence. The home of his childhood. It was darker now, the windows faintly lit from within, shadows moving behind curtains. A new family lived there, strangers to him, but not to the place. The front yard held a plastic swing tied to a branch and chalk drawings on the walkway. A life was being lived here. He stood at the edge of the property, unsure why. Then the door opened. A boy stepped out. 10, maybe 11, glasses slipping down his nose. He carried a book in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He walked past. Warren, without noticing, heading toward the sidewalk. Then, as if sensing something, he turned. "Hi," the boy said. Warren nodded. "Evening." The boy tilted his head. "You looking for someone?" "No," Warren replied. "Just remembering." The boy considered that, then held up the book. "I like to read out here when it's quiet. My mom says it's weird." "It's not weird," Warren said. "It's rare." The boy smiled, then opened the book, flipping to a page marked with a piece of ribbon. "What are you reading?" Warren asked. The boy shrugged. "It's about a man who helps people without telling anyone, just leaves notes, or makes things better and walks away. But nobody ever knows his name." Warren's breath caught. "And why do you like it?" he asked, his voice suddenly unsteady. The boy looked at him. "Because it means you don't have to be famous to matter." And in that moment, something inside Warren shattered, not violently, but with a soft finality. A release. He turned his face slightly, but it was too late. The tears were already there. The boy watched him for a moment, then gently offered the book. "You can borrow it. I already read it twice." Warren took it with both hands, steadying himself. "Thank you," he whispered. He sat on the nearby curb after the boy returned inside, holding the book to his chest. The street was silent again, but inside him, a truth pulsed louder than anything money had ever given him, that legacies are not built in boardrooms. They're not cemented in awards or named buildings or television specials. They're built when no one is watching, in chalk drawings, in whispered phrases, in scholarships, signed anonymously, in books read under street lamps, and in the eyes of a boy who reminded an old man of who he once was. Spring arrived late that year. The trees along the neighborhood's older blocks bloomed slower, as if unsure the cold had really left. But it came, eventually. And with it, changes so subtle they almost went unnoticed. Unless you were looking closely. At the community center, Malik stood at the entrance one morning, watching a new bookshelf being wheeled in. Donated. The man who delivered it didn't leave a name, just a small envelope tucked between two volumes. Inside was a note. No signature, just 5 words. "Still planting, still watering, always." Malik folded the paper slowly, his throat tight. He didn't need to know who it was from. Some messages don't need return addresses. Down the block, the little girl with the chalk found a package waiting outside her apartment door. Inside, 3 new sets of colored chalk, a sketch pad, and a simple note. "Keep drawing. You see things." She smiled, ran outside, and began to cover the sidewalk again, this time with a tree. Big roots, a hollow trunk, a squirrel in the center. At the school, a boy with glasses won a quiet scholarship, just enough to attend a science camp over the summer. He never applied. It simply arrived. His mother cried when she opened the letter. The boy didn't understand why at first. At Leo's barbershop, business picked up, not because of any grand campaign, but because someone had written a glowing anonymous review, posted flyers around the community, and quietly paid for a year of online advertising. Leo never knew who. He just kept cutting hair and telling stories. The eye mural on the side of the old convenience store was repainted, not professionally, just by locals, kids and teens and old neighbors. They covered it with images from the block, porches, swings, barbershops, backpacks, chalk trees. At the center, in faint gold paint, the phrase, "You matter," even if no one says it. Nobody knew who had first written it, but it stayed. And quietly the neighborhood began to breathe again, not loudly, not in headlines, but in little ways. A new bench at the park, a repaired swing, a volunteer knocking on a door without needing to be thanked. No one connected the dots. No one saw the old man board a plane weeks earlier, holding a sketchbook, a worn photo, and a borrowed novel in his bag. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift he left behind. Because what had changed wasn't just the neighborhood. It was the way people began to look at one another. not as problems, but as roots, waiting to grow. Years passed, not all at once, but in the way years do, in grocery lists, in birthdays, in lost socks and sudden illnesses and porch lights left on for no reason. The neighborhood aged like all places do. Some homes were repainted, others sagged. Further into time, but something had stayed. It wasn't a program. It wasn't a foundation. It was harder to name. It was the way people paused before speaking, the way they asked, "Are you okay?" and waited for the answer. The way someone left bread on a doorstep or helped fix a bike chain without needing to be told how or why. There was a quiet continuity that wove itself into the place. One fall morning, a new family moved into the old Buffett house. They didn't know whose name had once been on the mailbox. They didn't need to, but their daughter found something while cleaning out the basement. A book, dusty but dry, wedged behind a beam. Inside, in handwriting that had nearly faded, were these words: kindness. It's like oxygen. You don't always notice it, but when it's missing, everything aches. She read it aloud to her parents at dinner. Her father copied it and pinned it above his desk. Her mother embroidered it into a pillow she gave to the neighbor who brought over soup that week. The phrase traveled quietly. And in another part of the city, in a small library tucked between two apartment buildings, a man in his late 40s ran a free reading circle every Thursday. His name was Eugene. He never talked about how he got there. He only spoke of the characters in the books, how they made mistakes, how they tried again, how sometimes all it took was one unseen moment of grace to change the course of a life. He kept a sketchbook beside his chair. Occasionally, he'd draw someone from memory, a boy with large glasses, a girl holding chalk, a man sitting alone on a curb watching the sunset like it was his first. And sometimes, very rarely, he would add a tree, always with a hollow in the center, always with roots stretching wide beneath the page. No one ever asked why. Far away, on a quiet estate in a different state, Warren sat beneath real trees, old, knotted, patient. He no longer walked as far, and his hands weren't as steady, but his mind still wandered. Not to markets, not to boardrooms, but to chalk drawings and cold porches and anonymous envelopes, to small gestures that had somehow traveled farther than his own name. And on the table beside him the sketchbook remained, open to a page he turned to often, a simple tree, no words, just roots. He never spoke of the trip to anyone. Some stories don't need to be told, they just need to be lived. And some legacies don't need a name, they only need a place to land. There's a boy named Isaiah. He lives 3 blocks from the old barber shop in a modest apartment with his grandmother. His mother left years ago, and his father, a name whispered but never explained, remains a shadow in the corners of every family photo. Isaiah doesn't speak much at school, but he listens intently. One day, during library hour, a teacher hands him a book with a post-it note inside. To those who carry more than they show, this book sees you. There's no name, no explanation, just that sentence. Isaiah reads the book 3 times. Then he starts writing his own stories in the margins of his notebook, small ones, about people who live in trees, about a quiet old man who gives away umbrellas before it rains, about a girl who can hear the thoughts of forgotten toys. One afternoon, he reads one aloud. The class falls quiet, not from confusion but reverence, the kind that comes when something real has been said. His teacher, Malik's younger sister, asks where he learned to write like that. Isaiah shrugs. "It's not me. I think it's from the book." She smiles, but doesn't correct him. Some gifts pass through us. That same week across town, Leo locks up his barbershop a little later than usual. As he walks home, he passes the mural, the one painted by neighbors, covered in faces and roots. Someone's added something new. Just below, The golden phrase, a hand-drawn plaque, in honor of the ones who gave quietly. Leo stops, takes off his hat, and for a moment just looks. He doesn't know who added it, maybe a kid, maybe a stranger, but he recognizes the feeling behind it. He keeps walking, but slower now, as if letting that silence stay with him a little longer. Elsewhere, in a quiet nursing home far from Omaha, an older woman named Grace reads a letter. It arrived with no return address. Inside, a printed photo of her from 60 years ago, her high school graduation when she was valedictorian, but couldn't afford college. Beneath it, a check, a note. You never stop being bright. This is just for the things the world forgot to give you. She cries for the first time in years. She uses the money to fund art classes for children in the home's basement rec room. She paints again, for the first time since her 20s, and in the first class she draws a tree, wide trunk, deep roots, a hollow in the center. She doesn't know why. She just feels it. Back in the neighborhood, Malik finds himself writing more. Not grants, not proposals, letters, notes left on chairs, slips of encouragement under books. He never signs them, but he remembers something Walter said on his last visit, a pair of shoes, and a library card. And somehow that's enough. What began as an act of kindness has become a language. A thread of silence weaving through lives, pulling them into something larger than any one person. They call it luck, or grace, or coincidence. But sometimes late at night, those who have felt it, who have been moved by something nameless, look up from their book or their dinner or their folded laundry and wonder, for just a second, who started this? Then they remember it doesn't matter, because now it's theirs to continue. The seasons began to fold into one another like old letters, each carrying less urgency, more softness. Warren's days became smaller, slower, but not quieter. There was a different kind of sound now, the rustle of trees in the morning breeze, the faint scratch of pencil on paper, the subtle creak of his favorite chair as he leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of time. He no longer traveled. His world fit comfortably within the bounds of a porch, a path to the mailbox, and the hum of a radio playing symphonies he'd loved in his youth. He received letters now, hundreds, most from strangers. Some included stories, others sketches. One child had drawn a tree, with coins as leaves and hands offering them to smaller hands. On the back, "I want to grow like this." He kept that one pinned above his writing desk. His caretaker, a woman named Eleanor, came daily. She was gentle but firm, efficient but warm. She never asked about his wealth, never pried about his past. One day, while adjusting his blanket, she paused. "Mr. Buffett," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, his eyes clouded but alert. "Of course, you get so many letters, so many people, moved by something. But you never speak about it, never tell them it was you. Why?" Warren sat with the question for a while. Then, slowly, "Because if they knew it was me," he said, "they might stop believing it could be them." Elena didn't reply, just nodded. In that silence, something passed between them, something heavier than a truth, but lighter than a burden. Later that week, she found him sitting outside, a blanket over his knees, a notebook in his lap. He'd fallen asleep, pencil in hand. The last thing he'd written, "Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we leave within." As days passed, his voice grew softer, but his presence never dimmed. People who visited said they felt something sitting beside him, like warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, like being remembered even if you hadn't met him before. One evening, Elena brought him tea and found him watching the sunset. "I used to chase the numbers," he whispered. She sat beside him. "But in the end," he continued, "it was the silence between them that mattered. They stayed like that, watching the sun dip behind the trees, neither needing to speak. And when the sun finally disappeared, Warren smiled. Not because it was ending, but because it had been enough. There was no headline, no breaking news alert, no flood of tributes or retrospectives, just a quiet notice filed under legal records, processed without ceremony. Walter B. passed away peacefully in his home, no next of kin listed. The town didn't. Pause, not visibly, but something shifted. At Leo's barbershop, a young man walked in holding a worn envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter and a set of keys. Leo read it twice, then looked out the window for a long time. The note simply read, "You gave me dignity when I had none. Now I'm giving back the chair." The young man didn't say more. He just waited. Leo handed him the keys, then quietly sat in the customer's chair, heart pounding. In the community center, Malik received a large brown box delivered with no name. Inside, journals, stacks of them. Years of notes, clipped articles, sketches, phrases. On the top one, a single phrase had been penciled into the cover: observe, serve, disappear. He flipped through the pages. Lists of students, notes about local programs, maps of the neighborhood drawn and redrawn, donations recorded in small, coded markings. His own name was there long before they met. Malik closed the book, then placed it on the shelf of their new reading room, labeled simply Legacy Binder Number 1. He knew more would come. Elsewhere, Elena received a final letter, not from Warren, but from the bank. A trust had been established in her name. Its purpose? To train a new generation of anonymous caretakers, not nurses, not aides, but witnesses. People who understood that presence was a form of power, that listening could be a gift, that the smallest human interactions, pouring tea, adjusting a blanket, could echo longer than applause. She cried, but not for him, for what he'd shown. Her was possible. In the months that followed, no statue was built, no foundation launched in his name, yet slowly a movement grew. Nameless, but real. People began to do things differently. A teacher left lunch for a student without asking questions. A clerk paid for a stranger's bus fare. A barista added a quote to every cup sleeve, "You're seen." And in each of these small acts, there was something familiar, like a whisper passed between hearts. They called it luck, or grace, or nothing at all. But in quiet corners of the world, beneath the noise, a simple truth kept taking root. You don't have to be known to be felt. You don't have to be seen to make others visible. You don't have to be named to become unforgettable. Somewhere far from Nebraska, a child bends down in a garden, hands deep in the dirt. It's early morning and the world is just beginning to stretch. The child's fingers are covered in soil. She holds a seed in her palm, small, unremarkable. She places it into the ground with care, patting the earth gently over it. Then she sits. She does not know who donated the seeds to her school, just that they came in an envelope marked, "For the ones who wait." She's not in a hurry. Nearby, a man fixes a swing in a park without being asked. He doesn't speak. To the children, he just tests the chains, replaces the bolts, then leaves a folded napkin on the bench. Inside, a drawing of a tree, hollow in the middle, roots beneath. A teenager on a bus offers his seat, then steps off a stop early to give space to a mother juggling groceries. He leaves behind a book tucked between the seats. On the first page, in quiet handwriting, "If you're reading this, you're part of something bigger." None of them know each other. None of them know Warren Buffett. But something moves through them, not as memory, not as myth, but as momentum. In homes, offices, alleyways, and schools, people are beginning to ask themselves quieter questions. What do I leave behind in the silence? What grows when I'm not looking? Whose story did I touch without knowing it? There are no answers, only a kind of listening. Back in Omaha, the old house stands quietly. A new child lives there now. He draws every day on the sidewalk. Sometimes animals, Sometimes words, but often trees, always the same shape, strong trunk, wide base, and a space in the center just big enough to hide something precious. One day, the boy asks his mother, "Why do I always draw the same tree?" She pauses, thinking, then simply says, "Maybe it's the one that remembers you." The boy nods. He understands without needing to understand, and across the world, without ceremony or sound, one man's life continues, not in echoes, but in actions, not in legacy, but in presence, not in fame, but in the spaces others now choose to fill. Silently. Long before the man, before the empire of numbers and portfolios, there was a boy. He walked home alone most days, his shoes whispering against the sidewalk. He kept to the edges of the hallway at school, clutching books that smelled of chalk and old paper. Teachers liked him but never quite knew him. Other kids respected his quiet but rarely invited him in. Warren didn't mind. He liked the silence. It made room for things other people didn't notice. He saw the janitor bring lunch from home every day and leave half of it on the windowsill for the cat, Warren guessed. He saw the girl in the second row scribble in her notebook, not homework, but poetry. He saw his teacher pause every time she mentioned the word home, and he saw her eyes soften when no one else did. At night, his room became a sanctuary of observation. He'd lie on his stomach, studying old price catalogs, not for profit, but for patterns, for stories hidden in repetition. His father, once a congressman, now sold securities with a quiet dignity that left the house both proud and afraid. His mother moved through the kitchen with precision, her face calm, her sighs deeper than words. One evening, Warren overheard an argument through the thin hallway walls. It wasn't loud, just tired. Something about a bill, something about the future, something about whether they'd ever be okay. He didn't cry, he just sat on his bed, holding a small silver coin his grandfather had given him, a coin that suddenly felt heavier. The next day, he gave it away to Leo, the barber who let him sit and listen when he had nowhere else to go. Leo had joked that haircuts weren't free, but the boy's honesty was payment enough. Warren returned the next morning, placed the coin on the counter, and left without a word. Leo never spent it, and Warren never asked if he'd kept it. In his solitude, the boy began to understand something few adults ever truly grasp, that being invisible isn't the same as being nothing. In fact, invisibility held power. It allowed him to observe before acting, to listen before speaking, to give without receiving, and it planted something deep, a quiet kind of compass that pointed not toward attention, but toward intention. He would carry that forward into every room, every meeting, every deal, not as a strategy, but as survival. Because once long ago, he had been a boy who watched the world forget itself, and he'd promised silently to never forget it. Warren was 12 the day he saw his father cry, not loudly, not with tears, but in a way that made the entire house still. It began like any other weekday. His father, Howard, left early, dressed in his usual gray suit, carrying his worn briefcase. He worked at the local bank, not as a powerful executive, but as a trusted advisor, the kind of man people sought for steady words when storms came. That afternoon, Warren came home to find his mother standing by the window, arms folded. She wasn't cooking. The radio was off. He sensed it immediately. Something had broken. When the door opened, Howard stepped in without a word. He placed his briefcase gently by the wall, loosened his tie, and sat at the dining table without removing his coat. "I'm sorry," he said, not to anyone in particular. They shut it down. No warning. His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. Warren watched from the hallway, invisible. He saw the way his father rubbed his eyes, the way his mother stayed standing, unmoving. The silence between them was heavier than any collapse. It wasn't just the job, it was the meaning, the trust that came with years of serving others. Gone. That night, Warren couldn't sleep. He went downstairs and found his father sitting in the dark, holding a photograph of the bank staff, faces lit with smiles from a time that now felt imagined. Howard didn't speak when Warren entered, but after a long pause he said, "You know, what hurts most, son?" Warren waited. "It's not losing the job, it's knowing I won't be there tomorrow for the man who always waits until Thursday to ask for help, or the widow who forgets her account number and tells me the same story. Every time." Warren didn't respond. He just sat beside him, and for the first time he understood that loss wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just the quiet disappearance of a role you played in someone else's life. 2 days later, his father dressed in the same grey suit and began writing letters. Not to protest, not to complain, but to connect people he used to. Help with new contacts, new paths, new support. "No one should fall just because I did," he told Warren. That single sentence lodged itself deep within the boy. Years later, Warren would build empires. He would be praised for resilience, for patience, for vision. But those closest to him would know his greatest asset wasn't his mind. It was what he'd inherited in that quiet dining room, the will to remain useful, even when unseen. Leo kept it in a small drawer, wrapped in tissue, tucked behind old receipts and appointment cards. The coin had remained there for more than 60 years. It had tarnished slightly, dulled with time. But he never polished it. He liked it that way. It reminded him that beauty didn't have to shine to be valuable. Some days he'd take it out, roll it between his fingers, and remember the boy, quiet, wide-eyed, always watching. The one who never asked for anything but left something behind anyway. He never told anyone about the coin, not even his wife, not even when business got slow and the rent crept up like a silent tide. He always found a way, until the day came when he didn't. It was late winter and a burst pipe had flooded the back room of the shop. Equipment was damaged, chairs warped, the insurance claim was stuck in red tape. Leo stood behind the counter staring at the closed sign he couldn't afford to flip back around. He opened the drawer, held the coin one more time, and, with a sigh, placed it in his coat pocket, not as defeat, but as tribute. He walked to the nearest pawn shop. The owner, a young man in his 20s, took the coin, weighed it, turned it under the light. "Not worth much in silver," he said. "But it's old. Has a story." Leo smiled faintly. "All good coins do." The young man offered $20. Leo nodded. That night, he bought materials to repair one of the chairs himself. Took him 3 days. His hands ached, his knees cracked. But when the next customer sat down, Leo felt something return that was more valuable than money: purpose. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the coin never made it to the register. The pawn shop owner, curious about the engraving on the edge, looked it up, discovered it was part of a limited mint, circulated in Omaha. Something about the date, the place, the initials. He didn't sell it. Instead, he left it on the counter. A week later, a boy named Devon walked in, 11 years old, shoelaces untied, coat 2 sizes too small. He wandered the store like a museum, his eyes tracing the shapes of things he could never afford. The coin caught his eye. "Is that for sale?" he asked. The owner paused, then pushed it toward him. "No, but it's for you." Devon blinked. "Why?" "Because you looked at it like it was already yours." The boy didn't take it right away. He stared at it, then at the man, then whispered, "Thanks. I'll keep it safe." And he did, in his pocket, in his dreams, in his notebooks, where he drew it over and over again. He didn't know who had touched it before. He didn't know why it mattered, only that it made him feel seen. Before the center, before the books and the laughter and the painted hallways, Malik was ready to leave. He had packed his things into a borrowed suitcase, his final paycheck folded into his jacket. His plan was simple: one-way bus ticket out, of the city, and maybe, if he could forget enough, start again somewhere that didn't remind him of what he couldn't fix. The apartment he shared with his cousin had grown cold, literally and otherwise. The heat had been cut off weeks before. The landlord stopped knocking. The job at the grocery store was gone, and the volunteer project he tried to build at the library collapsed under budget cuts and bureaucracy. It felt like the city had given up on itself, and he was next. The morning of his departure, he took one last walk down Grant Street. He passed the old bookstore, the crumbling park bench he once read on, the lot where he had once dreamed of building a little place where kids could go after school. That dream had faded fast. He stopped at the bus station, ticket in hand, then he checked his pocket. The letter wasn't there when he'd left the apartment. He was sure of it, but now, folded in thirds, no envelope, there it was, typed clean, precise, just 2 lines. If you leave, the silence stays. If you stay, the roots grow. No name, no signature, just those words. He didn't move for a long time. People passed. Buses came and went. The driver called for his line twice. He never boarded. Instead, Malik walked back home. Then the next day, he walked to the old lot, the one with the broken sign and the overgrown grass. He cleared a patch of earth, sat there for hours, and wrote. By the end of the week, he'd made phone calls, asked for help, heard no more times than he could count. But he didn't stop. A year later, the Hollow Tree project opened. No one ever claimed the letter. He stopped wondering who had sent it, because maybe it wasn't important who planted the seed, only that someone believed the soil was still worth turning. Warren was 8 when he drew his first tree. It was during a thunderstorm, the kind that makes the walls tremble and the lights flicker. His mother had lit candles in the living room and handed him a pencil to distract him from the wind. He sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and no instructions. He didn't think. He just drew a single tree, tall, wide-trunked. At its base, a hollow space, a dark oval like an eye watching from the center of the bark. Above, branches reached out unevenly, like hands stretching into the unknown. When his mother saw it, she said nothing, just ran her fingers over the hollow in the drawing and asked, "What lives in there?" Warren had shrugged. "Maybe everything that's quiet." She smiled, though her eyes were heavy. "Then you've drawn the safest place in the world." He kept that drawing for years, folded it, unfolded it, redrew it on notebook corners, in the margins of library books. Sometimes the hollow grew larger. Sometimes it nearly disappeared, but it was always there. When he was older, in his early 20s, and alone in a dorm room far from Omaha, he redrew it again, on the inside of a matchbox he carried in his coat. It reminded him of home, of shelter, of the idea that even the quietest places could hold something sacred. And then, as life accelerated, through meetings, calculations, calls, applause, he stopped drawing it. Years passed. Until, one day, as an old man sitting on a park bench in the neighborhood he thought he'd left behind, a little girl handed him a piece of chalk. He didn't know what to draw, but his hand did. The tree came back without effort. The same trunk, the same hollow, the same branches, now softer with time. And when the girl looked at it and said, "That's where the squirrel lives," Warren felt a crack open in his chest, because she was right. Something did live there. Not a squirrel, but memory, hope, protection. It wasn't just his drawing anymore. It belonged to her now, to anyone who'd ever needed a hollow space to place their fears, a safe place to return to, again and again, even in silence. The tree would appear in books, on murals, in notes passed between strangers. No one would know where it began, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about who drew it first. It was about who needed it most. It was Elena who found it. Months after his passing, she had returned to the house not out of duty, but out of something quieter, an ache perhaps, or a need to confirm that the silence had really settled. She walked through the rooms, touching the places where his presence still lingered, the back of the reading chair, the knob of the window he used to open every morning, the stack of books by the bed he never finished. In the small drawer of his desk, beneath layers of papers, receipts, and handwritten lists, she found a sealed envelope. It had her name on it. She didn't open it immediately. She sat down, the morning sun soft on her face, and held it like a fragile thing. Then, slowly, she tore the flap. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper, old, yellowing, written in his unmistakable neat script. But there was no farewell, no wisdom, no summation of a life, just one sentence. What grows when no one's looking? That was it. No signature, no date, just a question. She read it again and again, as if the weight of it would change with each pass. It didn't, but something inside her did. She placed the note on the desk, then walked to the window and opened it, letting the air in. Below, a young boy rode past on his bike, shouting for someone to follow. A woman watered her plants with a plastic cup. The mailman waved, life unaware, unconcerned, unfolding. And suddenly, Elena understood. The note wasn't meant to end anything. It was meant to continue something. It wasn't a closing. It was an opening. She left the letter on the desk. Later that year, when Malik visited, he found it and copied the question into a notebook, then into a mural, then into a curriculum. What grows when no one's looking became a phrase spoken quietly in classrooms, whispered before bedtime, scribbled onto the back of receipts and posted on corkboards. No one attributed it to Warren Buffett. No one had to, because the question belonged to whoever needed it, and what it left behind wasn't an answer, but a path. It was a cloudy Saturday when their paths crossed. Nothing grand, no dramatic music. Just a community cleanup project in the old park near Grant Street, organized by Malik's Center, supported by volunteers, some of whom had never met before that day. Devon was there, now a teenager, taller, still quiet. The silver coin remained in his pocket, always. He didn't talk about it, but it reminded him to look for things that might otherwise go unseen. Across the field, Grace sat under a tent, offering water and sandwiches to the younger volunteers. Her hands, still steady with a paintbrush, moved gently over paper napkins where she scribbled short messages for the kids to discover. You're needed. Keep going. You matter. One girl read hers, smiled, and placed it in her shoe for safekeeping. Isaiah was painting a fence post, headphones in, but his eyes scanning the horizon like someone searching for something they couldn't name. He paused. When he saw Devon, noticed how he moved, how he paused before helping others. There was something familiar in that silence. They spoke briefly about music, paint colors, the awkwardness of volunteering. Neither mentioned the coin or the book or the chalk drawings, but when they parted ways, they did so with a quiet nod. That felt heavier than words. That afternoon, Malik stood near the swing set, freshly repaired, watching the group. He didn't know Grace's history, or Devon's coin, or Isaiah's stories, but he sensed something profound, a rhythm, a shared pulse, as if some invisible thread connected them, not by origin, not by circumstance, but by choice. By the way they had each been touched once by something that asked for nothing in return and had chosen to pass it on. Later that week, they would all remember that day in fragments. Devon, the way the fence caught the light. Grace, the way a child hugged her without asking. Isaiah, the laughter during cleanup. Malik, the silence afterward, the good kind. And none of them would think to ask why they were all there at the same time, but they would keep showing up, again and again, as if called by something unnamed but known. There is a place between memory and meaning, a space so quiet it can only be heard by those who stop long enough to listen. It is not marked on any map. It doesn't appear in ledgers or wills or headlines, but it lives just beyond the noise, where the invisible things are planted. Somewhere a tree grows, its roots are not documented, its leaves never named, and its hollow is empty, but not vacant. It waits for questions, for kindness, for small hands carrying chalk and men with coins in their pockets, and women who leave notes under books. It waits for silence to do what sound cannot. And in that hollow, something stirs. Not a legacy, but a continuation, a rhythm passed from stranger to stranger, from one quiet act to another, a reminder that we are made not only by what we build, but by what we leave behind in others. Not the loud things, the soft ones, the ones done without needing to be seen. Like the man who once walked his old neighborhood, without saying who he was, who sat on a curb, accepted a sketch from a forgotten friend, and left a question instead of a name. A man who knew that what grows when no one's looking may be the only thing that lasts. If this story touched your heart in a quiet, lasting way, like this video and subscribe to Panorama Legacy. Every click helps share messages that don't shout, but stay. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and which moment in Warren's journey moved you the most. And if you're ready for another story, one that inspires without speaking loudly, that transforms without needing the spotlight, click on the next video on your screen, because sometimes what the world needs most is just one more silent presence.